Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Don't be shy.
The story everyone thought they knew about David just shattered. His own neighbor has finally spoken out, revealing a chilling side of the case no one expected. While David's team has pushed the idea of limited contact with Celeste, this witness tells a completely different story. From quiet nights in the Hollywood Hills to a mysterious damaged Tesla parked outside for weeks, the neighbor's testimony flips the entire timeline on its head. And here's the part that changes everything. He swears he saw Celeste alive, months after she was officially declared missing. But if that's true, then what really happened behind those walls? When the headlines first broke about David and Celeste, much of the story came from speculation, online theories, media leaks, and statements from his legal team. But then, everything changed. A voice from inside the Hollywood Hills itself emerged, someone who had been living right next door to David the entire time. This anonymous neighbor's testimony didn't just add details, it rewrote the entire timeline. According to his account, he first noticed David moving into the Hollywood Hills rental in February 2024. At first, it seemed like just another young musician chasing the Los Angeles dream, quiet, polite, and keeping to himself. But soon, the neighbor realized David wasn't alone. Celeste was there too, and not just occasionally. He claims he saw her so frequently that it was impossible not to assume they were living together. From his perspective, it looked like a routine domestic life. He would see them coming and going, carrying groceries, spending evenings inside, acting like a couple who had settled into a rhythm. No loud music, no constant stream of visitors, no wild parties. Just two people living side by side in one of LA's most exclusive neighborhoods. To him, they seemed like a young adult couple, maybe around 18 or 19 years old. But here's the part that shakes everything. He swears he saw them together as late as July 2025, over a year after Celeste had already been reported missing nationwide. Think about that. While her family was pleading for answers, while law enforcement was circulating her photo, the neighbor insists she was right there, in plain sight, living with David. And when the truth finally surfaced about Celeste's real age and tragic fate, the neighbor says he was floored. He admitted he had no idea she was just 15. He believed what anyone might believe, that she was older, an assumption that now adds another layer of horror to the case. Because if he could be fooled, how many others around David ignored what was happening? This testimony didn't just rattle the investigation, it directly contradicted David's team, who had maintained there was minimal contact between him and Celeste. Suddenly, the image of a secret relationship hidden in the hills wasn't just rumor, it was eyewitness testimony. The neighbor's words weren't just casual observations. They opened a window into what looked like a carefully concealed routine. To the outside world, David was the rising star, busy with music, touring, and building his image. But behind the walls of his Hollywood Hills rental, a different picture was forming. According to the neighbor, the couple kept to themselves. No constant flow of cars, no strangers showing up at odd hours. Instead, he described something that felt strikingly ordinary. Evenings in, quiet mornings, groceries being brought inside, and a rhythm that suggested stability. To him, they looked like two young adults building a life together. And yet, that normalcy is exactly what makes the testimony so chilling. Because by the time the neighbor last saw them in July 2025, Celeste had been missing for over a year. Her face was plastered on missing posters. Her case had been highlighted in local news segments. Families across Los Angeles knew her name. But here she was, allegedly right in front of him, living inside one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. The neighbor admitted he never suspected anything unusual. He thought Celeste looked like she was around 18 or 19, the same age group as David. They weren't loud, they didn't fight in public, they didn't draw attention. And in an area like the Hollywood Hills, where celebrities and musicians come and go constantly, people tend to mind their own business. Why would he question what looked like just another young couple next door? But in hindsight, every detail takes on a darker weight. The silence, the privacy, the avoidance of attention, it all points toward a life carefully hidden from public view. And if Celeste truly was living there in plain sight, it raises devastating questions. How many people crossed paths with her and never realized? How could a missing child be overlooked in one of the most scrutinized areas of Los Angeles? What seemed like an ordinary domestic arrangement suddenly became one of the most explosive pieces of testimony in the case. And it left investigators asking a haunting question. If she was there all along, then who helped keep it quiet? If the neighbor's testimony about seeing Celeste alive months after her disappearance was shocking, his next observation was downright chilling. It centered around one object that has become the most infamous piece of evidence in this entire case, David's Tesla. Parked outside the Hollywood Hills rental, the sleek electric car suddenly became an eyesore in late August 2025. The neighbor recalled noticing heavy rear-end damage, like it had been in a serious collision. Curious, he asked David about it, expecting maybe a quick story about a fender bender or an accident on LA's busy streets. But instead of giving any explanation, David brushed it off. He offered no details, showed no concern, and made no move to get it repaired. That silence would haunt the neighbor later. For weeks, the damaged car just sat there, attracting tickets from local officers. The timeline is almost cinematic in its progression. August 26, 2025. Neighbor notices the damage for the first time. August 27th, police cite the vehicle. September 3rd, another ticket is slapped on the windshield. September 5th, the Tesla is finally towed away. September 8th, tow yard workers make the horrific discovery: the decomposed remains of Celeste inside the car. The neighbor insists that during those weeks he never smelled anything unusual, and experts have since suggested why. Tesla's design is nearly airtight, meaning odors could have been contained until the car was moved. That chilling detail adds another layer of horror, because while police, neighbors, and David himself were walking past that vehicle every single day, no one realized what it held inside. When investigators traced the timeline back, the Tesla became the focal point of the case. Why leave it damaged and unattended? Why ignore tickets piling up? And why did David, normally described as quiet and reserved, suddenly seem indifferent to something that should have been impossible to overlook? For the neighbor, those unanswered questions transformed his casual observations into haunting memories. A broken car he once dismissed as just another LA accident now stands as one of the most damning pieces of evidence in this tragedy. Once the neighbor's testimony went public, it sent shockwaves through both the media and the investigation. Up until that moment, David's legal team had maintained one consistent narrative: that his contact with Celeste was limited, fleeting, and nothing resembling a domestic arrangement. But here was a neighbor, someone who lived right next door, saying the exact opposite. The detail that he saw Celeste alive in July 2025, more than a year after she had been declared missing, flipped the story on its head. Suddenly, this wasn't just about speculation online or whispers in the music industry. This was first-hand observation from someone with no apparent agenda, someone who watched the quiet comings and goings at the Hollywood Hills house. And the timing of his statement, given directly to reporters on September 25, 2025, couldn't have been more explosive. It came just days after Celeste's body had been discovered in David's Tesla, and right as investigators were executing search warrants at the property. The public reaction was immediate. Social media lit up with threads dissecting the neighbor's words, calling it the smoking gun and the testimony that changes everything. Commenters asked the same questions over and over. How could she be seen so recently if she was already a missing person? Did others in David's circle know she was there? And if so, why didn't anyone come forward sooner? For investigators, the neighbor's account added a new level of pressure. If Celeste truly was cohabiting with David well into 2025, it meant the case wasn't just about a disappearance. It was about concealment, manipulation, and possibly even protection from those around him. The quiet domestic life described by the neighbor now looked less like ordinary privacy and more like deliberate secrecy. Meanwhile, the media framed the testimony as a direct contradiction to David's defense. His team had worked tirelessly to distance him from Celeste, but the neighbor's words painted a picture of intimacy, routine, and long-term cohabitation. And once the press seized on that angle, the story spread like wildfire. What had started as a single witness statement quickly spiraled into one of the most significant turning points in the case. The neighbor's words forced the public and investigators to confront a disturbing possibility. Celeste wasn't just missing. She might have been hidden in plain sight, right next door to one of Los Angeles' most affluent streets, while an entire circle of adults stayed silent. As the neighbor's revelations dominated headlines, David's inner circle scrambled to push back. His friends, industry contacts, and even casual acquaintances suddenly became spokespeople, each offering a version of events that painted David in a more sympathetic light. Their narrative centered on one core defense: they didn't know Celeste was underage. Multiple media outlets, including TMZ, News Nation's Banfield, Fox LA, and even Times of India, reported the same story. Friends of David claimed they believed Celeste was at least 19, a college-age peer. They said she always presented herself as older, carried herself like an adult, and even used fake IDs to get into Los Angeles clubs and parties that had strict age restrictions. According to them, everything about her suggested she was part of their world, someone who belonged in the music scene, not a teenager hiding in plain sight. One friend described David as gentle, soft-spoken, and shy. He insisted David never acted like someone involved in something dangerous or illegal. Another source emphasized that the pair didn't flaunt affection in public. No PDA, no wild displays. Instead, they blended into the background, showing up at gatherings together so often that it was just assumed they were a couple. But here's where the defense starts to crack. If these friends truly believed Celeste was 19, then how did they miss the warning signs? How did they never question why a college student was constantly with David, seemingly without classes, without friends her own age, and without a life outside of him? Social media users weren't buying it. Within hours of these statements surfacing, posts began calling the defense paper thin and accusing David's circle of willful ignorance. The friends' coordinated push to distance themselves only fueled further speculation. To critics, it didn't look like confusion, it looked like damage control, especially when you consider the timeline. Their statements appeared right after the neighbor's testimony gained traction, almost as if the defense was being patched together in real time. By stepping forward, David's friends hoped to shield themselves from scrutiny and paint Celeste as someone who deceived them all. But instead, their words raised even more uncomfortable questions. Were they genuinely fooled, or were they protecting their own reputations in the face of mounting evidence? The moment David's friends went public with their defense, the internet exploded. Instead of calming the storm, their words poured gasoline on it. The idea that an entire circle of adults genuinely believed Celeste was a 19-year-old college student struck many as not just unlikely, but impossible. On forums, Twitter threads, and TikTok breakdowns, users dissected every detail. If Celeste was so convincing as a college-age woman, then why was there evidence of her being only 11 or 12 when her alleged relationship with David began? Screenshots of old Discord messages resurfaced, supposedly dating back to 2022, showing interactions between David and Celeste when she would have been barely a preteen. Critics pointed out that those early online exchanges made the "we thought she was 19" defense collapse instantly. The skepticism grew louder as more details surfaced. Social media sleuths questioned how these friends could attend parties, watch David bring Celeste around consistently, and never wonder about her background. If she wasn't in college, if she wasn't working, if she wasn't surrounded by peers her own age, how did nobody stop to ask questions? To many, the only explanation was that they chose not to. Media outlets quickly joined in. The tab described the friends' statements as extremely disturbing, noting how their defense seemed less like genuine confusion and more like an orchestrated attempt to dodge accountability. The publication highlighted how public opinion was shifting. People weren't just questioning David anymore. They were questioning everyone who stood by him. And the more the defense leaned on Celeste's alleged fake IDs, the more backlash it drew. Yes, it was possible she used them to slip into clubs, but critics argued that fake IDs don't erase someone's demeanor, voice, or the way they interact. People began asking, if you saw her as young as 13 or 14, how could you suddenly convince yourself she was 19 without suspicion? What was intended as a shield for David's circle had the opposite effect. The public began to see the friends not as innocent bystanders, but as silent enablers. Their claims of ignorance rang hollow against the growing pile of digital evidence, witness accounts, and leaked messages suggesting this relationship stretched back years. In the court of public opinion, the verdict was swift. The defense wasn't believable. And if David's friends were lying, or even just choosing not to see the truth, it begged an even darker question. Who else knew? If the neighbor's account cracked open the story and the friends' shaky defense fueled public outrage, it was the timeline that truly destroyed any illusion of innocence. Piece by piece, investigators, journalists, and online sleuths stitched together years of digital breadcrumbs, witness accounts, and family statements, and what emerged was a disturbing picture that pointed to something far darker than anyone initially imagined. According to resurfaced evidence, the earliest traces of David and Celeste's connection date back to 2022. At the time, David was still a rising star in the music world, barely 17 himself, building his fan base through platforms like Discord. That's where investigators believe the first contact may have happened. Reports claim Celeste's profile listed her as 18 plus, but in reality, she was just 11 or 12 years old, still in elementary school. If true, this would mark the very beginning of a long, carefully hidden pattern. By 2023, the alleged relationship had intensified. Witnesses later described it as romantic. Even though Celeste was only 13, and David was 18. Experts who reviewed the timeline pointed out how the progression fit the classic stages of grooming: initial contact, building trust, isolation from peers, and eventually, full dependency. Celeste was reportedly skipping school, spending more time away from home, and drifting further from friends her own age. Her family noticed. In interviews, Celeste's mother admitted she had heard her daughter was seeing someone named David just before she disappeared in April 2024, when Celeste was only 14. The family had never met him, and they never got the chance. That same spring, Celeste vanished, and her case became a missing persons investigation. But digital traces told a different story. Investigators uncovered photos of David and Celeste wearing matching Hello Kitty-themed outfits. Tattoos on their fingers, identical in design, would later help confirm her identity after her remains were found. Tweets from David hinted at her presence during his songwriting sessions, embedding her into his creative process. All of this painted a picture of someone who wasn't just part of his personal life, but woven into his professional one as well. The timeline becomes even darker when connected to the Tesla. By late August 2025, weeks before Celeste's body was discovered, the damaged car sat abandoned outside David's rental. Investigators believe this may have coincided with the time of her death, given the advanced decomposition when she was found on September 8, 2025. What makes the timeline devastating is the sheer span of it. Celeste was only 11 or 12 at the alleged beginning of their contact. She was 13 when the relationship reportedly became romantic. She was 14 when she went missing, and she was 15 when her remains were discovered. At no point during those years was she ever of legal age. In California, where the age of consent is 18, any such involvement would be unlawful no matter how it was presented publicly. Each year in this timeline adds weight. Each witness, each message, each piece of digital evidence transforms the narrative from rumor into what looks like a sustained, deliberate pattern. And when the public saw this timeline laid bare, the outrage shifted from shock to fury. It wasn't just a tragic accident. It looked like years of red flags that were ignored, dismissed, or outright hidden until it was too late. The neighbor's testimony may have brought Celeste back into the story. The friend's defense may have revealed the cracks in David's circle, but it was the timeline that tied everything together into one damning picture, a relationship that should never have happened, stretching back years and ending in tragedy. The moment the disturbing timeline hit the public eye, the fallout was immediate and brutal. For David, this wasn't just about whispers online anymore. This was about careers, contracts, and an entire image built around being a young star suddenly collapsing in real time. Within hours of Celeste's identification being confirmed, brands began to distance themselves. Crocs and Hollister, two of David's most visible partnerships, cut ties outright, citing concerns about associating their names with someone connected to allegations involving a minor. Industry insiders leaked that other brands had quietly pulled back from ongoing negotiations, essentially blacklisting him from future sponsorships. The music industry reacted just as swiftly. On September 17, 2025, David's scheduled concert in Seattle was abruptly canceled. The official reason given was unforeseen circumstances, but everyone knew what that really meant. Fans who had already purchased tickets vented their frustration online, demanding refunds and posting threads dissecting the timeline of cancellations. Rumors swirled that other tour dates would soon follow, and insiders hinted that promoters were backing out to avoid liability. Streaming numbers told another story. His breakout track Romantic Homicide, once hailed as his anthem of success, saw a staggering 15% drop in plays within just 24 hours of the timeline revelations going viral. For an artist whose career had been fueled by online virality, those numbers weren't just statistics. They were a death sentence for momentum. But the fallout didn't stop at David himself. His entire circle came under scrutiny. Questions arose about who in his team, management, and friend group might have known Celeste's real age and turned a blind eye. Online sleuths demanded accountability, tagging record labels, managers, and producers in viral posts. The phrase enablers began trending, painting anyone associated with him as complicit in the silence. Meanwhile, the case sparked larger conversations that extended beyond David's name. Journalists and advocacy groups pointed to Discord, Instagram, and other platforms, asking how a teenager could slip so deeply into an adult entertainment circle without red flags being raised. The story transformed from one celebrity scandal into a broader indictment of the music industry's lack of safeguards for minors and the dangerous overlap of fame, fandom, and unchecked access. And while investigators had not yet filed charges as of September 26, 2025, the damage was already irreversible. David wasn't just fighting a criminal investigation, he was battling the collapse of his public image, his career, and his future. What began as the shocking discovery of a body in a Tesla had snowballed into something far larger, a cultural reckoning. The neighbor's testimony, the friend's defense, and the disturbing timeline combined into a narrative that no amount of PR could spin away. For David, the walls were closing in, and fast. When the story first broke, it seemed like another tragic headline, a missing teenager, a famous musician, and a shocking discovery inside a car. But as each new piece of testimony surfaced, the narrative grew darker and more complex. The neighbor's account placed Celeste right there, living in plain sight in the Hollywood Hills, months after the world believed she was gone. His words shattered David's defense and painted a picture of a hidden domestic life that shouldn't have been possible. The friend's defense strategy, claiming ignorance, pointing to fake IDs, and insisting Celeste looked older, only deepened public skepticism. Instead of shielding David, their excuses made the silence around her feel deliberate, like a collective decision to look the other way. And then came the timeline. Digital evidence, tattoos, Discord messages, and family accounts all aligned to reveal a chilling progression that stretched back years. What began as fan interactions allegedly evolved into a relationship that mirrored every stage of grooming until it ended in tragedy. The fallout was swift. Brands dropped him, concerts were canceled, streams plummeted, and the music industry distanced itself. Yet the biggest consequence may not be David's career collapse, but the larger questions left behind. How could a missing child live undetected in one of the most scrutinized cities in the world, and how many adults knew or suspected the truth but said nothing? This case is no longer just about David, it's about the failure of entire systems, friends, industry professionals, even digital platforms that allowed a teenager to slip through the cracks. Celeste's story is more than a scandal. It's a sobering reminder of how easily vulnerable lives can be hidden, ignored, or erased until it's far too late. And now, the question hangs heavy. Was this tragedy the result of one man's actions, or a web of silence that stretched much further than anyone wants to admit? What do you think? Did David's circle know more than they claimed, or were they genuinely fooled? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to follow every twist in this story.